My name is Dennis Smith, born in 1942, so we ended up in Alpine, where my mom grew up. I do what I have wanted to do since I was at least 10 years old. I have always wanted to be an artist. While I was still on my mission, I first started pondering exactly where my art would end up. In fact, one day on a P-Day, I got some florist's clay and fiddled with it and thought, man, I kind of like this. When I got home, I couldn't get all the classes I wanted that first semester, but I was able to get 2 art classes. One of them was a night sculpture class, and I came home that first night, said to Valois, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do sculpture. And for the next 20 years, sculpture was my total focus. But the painting didn't come until 20 years later. Painting has become equilateral to my sculpture. The sculpture went 3 or 4 different directions, but the painting pushed toward metaphysical subjects. One of the main themes of my painting is memory. My entire memory of my life entails and is rooted in Alpine. And Alpine became the heart of my personal expression. The title of the series of paintings is The Houses of My Friends. Living on the edge of town, I would always walk into town. All of the kids my age, from kindergarten through 12th grade, were either in the middle of town or there were a few of us on the edge of town. Thinking of houses as metaphors and thought of doing a series of my classmates' houses. The more I painted them, the more meaningful they became. I painted them all the same size on a format 24 by 24 inches so that they would have a consistency as a pattern in a series. The first one that we put up here, I decided we'd show my house first, though that was the last painting I did. I painted all the houses of my friends, and then I thought, oh, I had a house too. My first house is a basement house this is about 4 feet out of the ground. Here is the orchard, and there's my dad's chicken coop. That became our barn where I would milk the cow when Dad was to work at Geneva and couldn't milk in the morning or in the evening because he did shift work. When I was 11 years old, Mom and Dad were able to build on top. And so all through high school, we had a top on our house. We had a real house, finally. This was one of the first times I used my truck. To show you how the metaphors work in my paintings, I could have put it here, parked next to the house. I could show it leaving out of town, but it's halfway. It's right at the nexus between home and the rest of Alpine and the world. And that's how the metaphors have worked for me over the years. They've become sensible bonds between all the things that have developed meaning in my life. That's partly what these paintings came to represent, was an awareness of where Alpine is the root of the universe for people who live here. There were 5 boys and 9 girls. I'll start with Tom Despain, who lived in the house just south of the school of where Purple is now, because Purple is where the school was. This house, Tommy's house, was built in the late 1800s. It is a adobe house that has been painted over, and the adobes held up pretty good over the years. This one was Lowell's. Lionel and Lowell are both here, and they had a barnyard in the back, and it was always enjoyable to go to Lionel and Lowell's house because sometimes we'd go riding on their horses. There's my bike again, out, and in front of the house was a fence, but it wasn't a picket fence. It was one of those wire fences. This is the kitchen, and this was the part they built onto it and made a new kitchen for their mom. And I remember how special that was for them. But this was their living room, and it had a linoleum floor. The reason I remember that so well, and it's significant, is that's where the television was. And in the background is another thing that became a symbol to me over the years, and that's pine trees. And they're not just bindings between heaven and earth. They're arrows that point my hunger toward a hope for transcendence. This is the same house, but in this one it's for Lionel. And this time it's being seen from the south. This is on 2nd East up toward 2nd East and 2nd North. And that's where the little, is it a dance studio now? But that, when I was growing up, at first was Warren Clark's store. And we'd always buy candy and stuff on that corner. Here's the school and the gym and the school ground in front and the road into the school. There's the little gate, and there's the opening in that fence we were just talking about that goes back. And with Lionel, I focused on the barnyard. And this was called the bunkhouse, I think. And all the boys slept in the bunkhouse. I talked about the pine trees, and these three kind of become a symbol of deity. The last one of the boys is Harold. And Harold's house was a frame house that was probably built in the early 20th century. It's a white frame house, had a porch on the front, right around the corner. And this is kind of looking at it toward the back. And one of the major memories I have of Harold's house is that I remember one time particularly, I was in his house. His mom was watching television, and we walked out the back. He says, "Come here, I want to show you something." And we went back into this addition part of the house that was kind of like a storage room. And there was stuff piled over here in the corner. And he pulled out a Japanese flag and showed it to me. And I remember there was a bayonet knife, and those his dad had brought home from the war. Oh, and the two trees. And then there are also the trees that are bonded in winter and are explode into the heavens. Now, the first of the girls' paintings that we're going to show is Jane's house. I think this is one of my favorite paintings that I've ever done. There's something about the way the color patterns move and flow into each other, and a textural richness that I really love. Jane lived on Grove Drive, where you go up and the road splits and goes over the back of Cemetery Hill, and then it comes up and curls around the corner where Reynold Devy's orchard used to be, and this is where the road goes out in front. And barns are significant to me, but they seem to be nourishers in my paintings. And as the pattern evolved, and as I moved up and put the sun over here, going over Cemetery Hill, it's like Cemetery Hill is the edge of our life. And I've got Jane in this one sitting at the base of the cherry tree. And of course they had a fence out in front like at Lionel Lowell's house, and one of those old wrought iron gates. This is my grandpa's house. But the reason it's Ann's house is because after Grandpa sold the farm, Ann's family, they bought the farm, and after Clyde died, they couldn't take care of the farm, so they bought a house up there between Wayne McDaniel and Adams's. And there is my great-grandma's log house that I lived in till I was 5, and this is Alpine. And the hill behind First South and where I lived is up over here and out of the picture. But there's where the roundabout is, and this is the road that goes to American Fork, and this is the one that splits down to the freeway. This is where Paradise Lane is now. This is the other Ann's house, and this house is directly across the street from Margaret's basement house. There's the school and the gymnasium, and 2nd North and 2nd East comes over here. It was still a dirt road, and then Harold's house is on the corner, and Margaret's house is here. Ann Whitby's house was the first one I painted it, and I painted it probably 4 or 5 years before any of the others. And then as I had it hanging, I kept thinking, man, it's the one that triggered me wanting to paint all the others. One of the things I remember about Ann is when we would be chosen to go from the school over to the gymnasium to get ready for dances and stuff and to decorate things. The roads take us, and we come to intersections. We come to intersections several times a day. And it happens to all of us where we could turn and the whole rest of our life would be different. And we have no idea that it's going to be. This is Margaret's house. Their house was just north of Harold's house. Harold and Margaret, the two kids my age, that were neighbors with one another. Harold's house here, and then Margaret's house. And the other thing about Margaret is that it just never seemed to fail. When we would go to the gymnasium to dance, Margaret and I always ended up dancing together. This is Lois's house. Lois's house was a newer house, but it was a house before my time. I was born in 1942. These houses were built probably between 1915 and 1935. The other thing was significant is the brick is a purple brick. So it isn't the old low-fired brick, but it's a real tough brick. This is the walkway goes back to the kitchen door. There are steps that go up onto the front porch, and there are two pillars that go up, and then beams that come across here. A lot of kids from town would come to their big lawn on the south side of the house to play football. So I just had to put football in it. And they also had a wire fence in front of the house. When I think of Lois, I think of two things. One is that she's one of the girls my age that I had a crush on one time or another during that 12 years. And lots of times I would go down and play with Wayne so that I could be around where Lois was. And this is Merlin's house. This picture was painted in the winter, and I remember it well because it was on Main Street, north of Donna Higley's house, on the other side of the street, about a block and a half, past David Healy's house at the end of his property, and tucked back in the lane, back in about a half a block. And that's where the Strongs had their orchard, and here's the little lane coming in off of Main Street, and there was probably 100 yards between the house and the road. The old town road grader was parked at their house. They would always use it to scrape the snow off the roads, and lots of times we'd run behind it and grab on the back and slide. And they had a big tree in front of their house. They had vines on the side of the house. Over the years, they weren't ever trimmed back. And by the time the 1980s and 90s came along, the entire south end of the house was just vines. This is a very significant historical house. The colors in Lorraine's house have kind of a pastelness to them, because even though it was a farmhouse, because of my feelings, it's more this one is more pastoral. And East Mountain is behind it, and Box Elder Peak, and also in this one, American Fork. Charlotte's house is on the corner of 2nd North and Main Street. It's a children's preschool now. Charlotte was always really just a nice person. And they had bought that house probably in the late 30s. And being on that corner, you can look up and see the school. And then there was a little strawberry patch that went down to Olson's house. And that between that area is where the north end of the original Ford in Alpine was, 100 yards south of their house. This is Donna's house. This is another one that I particularly like aesthetically. It's a strong painting for me. Here's the house, right in the very center of the painting, and the 2 trees that were in front of their house. The house was built in the late 1800s, in that period between 1880 and 1900. Donna's house is right on the corner of 2nd North and Main Street. They didn't have a farm, but they had a large lot, and they had a little field in the back for potatoes and corn and stuff. And in the fronts they had a fence, and in this one I've got Donna's dad out with a rototiller tilling the garden. And this was the original porch. I think this might have been an add-on many years later. I learned in later years that most of that brick in Alpine was quarried, that produced most of the brick that was used on Alpine's brick houses. Looking from the south, over the top you can see Cemetery Hill. Cemetery Hill really was the center of town. You look to the east and you can see East Mountain to the north and its Lone Peak, and to south and you see Alpine spread out, and Beck Hill on the edge, and Utah Lake and the rest of the county. And in this field is where the wedding center is, right there next to it. This is a significant painting for the series, as it's the one where North Mountain is the most dominant. For anyone who has ever driven up the Alpine Highway or turned down by Macy's and come into town, you can't help but look at Lone Peak.